but I first want to say how honored I am and happy I am actually to be at this meeting. This is the 15th anniversary of the Ethos Institute, and I congratulate you, all of you who've been part of it. This is one of the most important organizations in the world in this area, and I want to congratulate you for how important it is and how many companies have participated in this effort over time. I've never had the opportunity to speak at this meeting over those 15 years, but I'm very, very happy to be here today. And I think it's particularly gratifying that I'm here to talk about an effort that's come from around the world, but you're also announcing an effort here within Ethos that's consistent. And we're very proud that the Ethos Institute is one of our core partners. Initially in Brazil, but my prediction is that we are going to do many, many things with you around the world. So thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you for providing this forum. Thank you for the partnership. And I'm very, very excited about what we can begin and continue today with this session. Now, the basic question that has brought me and our team to this place today is a very big question, and that is, how do we measure a nation's development? How do we measure success for a country? Measurement is important because what we measure, we pay attention to. We know this from business, we know this from every field. So how we think about measurement and how we define and measure success becomes very, very important to motivate progress, to motivate debate, to motivate change. And I think, as we all know, traditionally the way we've measured company and country success is primarily through measuring economic success. But from many years now, I think people have understood that that's not enough, that somehow economic success does not measure everything we care about. There's a lot of other things that matter. And there's been many efforts dating back for decades to go beyond just GDP. The pioneering effort was the Human Development Index, where GDP was there, but education and health were added. And the idea is that we need to look more broadly in defining success. We can't just use GDP. We have to add these dimensions that are so important, really, to the prosperity and health of a society, to the measurement. And as time goes on, we've learned more and more that we can't just think about economic development alone. We have to think about social development at the same time. And I myself have been heavily involved in economic development for more than 20 years. I was the co-chair of the Global Competitiveness Report issued by the World Economic Forum every year. I was proud to do that. And I think that was a very important effort. And that effort has taught me that measurement does matter. Because as we improved that Global Competitiveness Report, as we made it richer and deeper and more rigorous, we found that governments around the world paid attention and did things and wanted to improve their ranking. And so I had understood the power of measurement, but also in my work on economic development was recognizing increasingly that economic development was not just economic. That actually successful economic development required social progress. Because unless we achieved certain social progress in the society, we weren't in a position actually to succeed at economic development. And so as we study development more and more, that interplay between social and economic has become more and more and more prominent in the thinking of scholars and practitioners. But yet, we are still early in the journey of really how to understand this. And one of the most important reasons that we don't understand it well is we literally haven't had the data. We haven't had the systematic, rigorous measurement on the social side that we've had now for quite some time on the economic side. So the team of people that conceived of the Social Progress Index really were coming from this perspective. Many of the leading thinkers here were, from the foundation world, from the social world. And somewhere along the way, they approached me and said, would you be interested in working with us to try to create this thing? And of course, I jumped at it. Partly because I have a lot of faith in the people involved, but also partly because in my own work, in economic development, I was feeling a vacuum, a gap. If we were going to take our economic development thinking further, we were going to have to get into some new areas that we never even touched before. And so what an exciting opportunity to work on this area. I think at the same time, we saw another opportunity, which was that not only does social progress really create conditions to allow economic development, but actually business actually has some profound opportunities to influence social progress. See, we thought of business primarily as an economic thing. We looked at businesses primarily through the lens of profitability and productivity and competitiveness. But the more deeply we started looking at business and the role of business in societies, the more we started to see a broader role for business. And so you can see how these forces at this moment in history have started to come together. And the result has been this effort, which we call the Social Progress Index. It's an effort to measure the social progress of a society, separate from its economic success. Economic success is important, we'll see that later. But social progress is a separate thing. You can't measure it by simply measuring GDP. So how do we actually measure that? Drawing on the experience and the history we've had with other measurement efforts. And there's quite a few now. There's quite a few efforts. Human Development Index was the grandfather of all of these. But time has produced other efforts, the Millennium Development Indicators, Happy Planet, which is really about feeling satisfied and happiness, which has grown. People are now trying to measure happiness. OECD measures the so-called better life. These are just some of the efforts. And by the way, there are lots of other efforts at the national level that we see, including examples like the ethos indicators, which have the same spirit. But we wanted to take a fresh look and a global look at how to do this. And that is the process that started about 2 years ago and culminated in the first release of this of our social progress framework in April of this year in Oxford at the Skoll World Forum, which is kind of the Davos of the social sector. And this effort is now, we are committed for this to be a long-term process. It will continue for the indefinite future, and we promise that it will get better, because we're going to do everything we can to make it better and better and better. It started with 50 countries, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that's just the start. That was based on practicality and data. This year, I expect we'll have at least 100 countries. And so let me describe to you what this effort is, how we're thinking about measuring social progress, what some of the findings have been of this first round of measurement, Well, let's talk a little bit about Brazil. Where does Brazil stand? How's it doing? What do we learn from this work about your country and some of the implications? And then let's talk a little bit about how you put this into action with a particular focus on the role of business. So clearly, government and NGOs for many, many years have been focused on social progress. They don't necessarily use that word, but that's what governments and NGOs do. They worry about issues like nutrition, they worry about issues like water, they worry about issues like basic education, they worry about issues like inclusion. The question we want to raise is, what's the role of business in all of this? And I think we're getting some new insights into that role of business that I'd like to talk a little bit about as we go forward today. So what is the basic philosophy and framework for the Social Progress Index? Well, first of all, we decided very early that if we were going to measure social progress, we had to do that separately from measuring economic progress. And that had really never done before. Most of the efforts to measure beyond GDP included both. There are some economic measures, some social measures. The problem when you put the two together is you can't really understand what's causing what's going on. The Human Development Index, for example, has GDP in it. And GDP is very heavily influential in determining what the Human Development Index is. So we decided that we would separate economic measurement and social measurement and do those separately. And then we can examine how they related to each other. That was kind of crucial decision number one. And that is actually unique of all the indexes in this area. Second, we set out to measure social progress in a holistic way. In the social sector, there's a tendency for each group or each effort to focus on one issue at a time. Environment, health, nutrition, safety, inclusion, and there are passionate people that are working on each of these issues. Not only in Brazil, but around the world. But if we were going to measure social progress and we wanted to create sort of the same kind of power that we have with economic measurement, we felt it was important to try to look at social progress in a holistic way, not issue by issue, to see it broadly. But that had never been done before. There was no definition of social progress. There was no agreed upon framework for thinking about what are the aspects of social progress. There was lots of good work, which we drew upon very heavily, but it had never been pulled together. And so over the last 2 years, with the help of some very sophisticated, accomplished scholars and others, this effort has come to where we are today, and I'll show you in a minute. The third choice we made was to focus on outcomes. An outcome is the results you actually achieve. Not how much money you spent, not whether you wrote a piece of legislation, not anything like that, but actually the outcome. And wherever possible, the outcomes in the absolute strict sense of the word. This is hard to do. The data, of course, is limited. That's internationally comparable, but to the maximum extent possible, this was about measuring outcomes. Now, once we measure outcomes, then we can start asking questions like, how much money does it take to achieve those outcomes? For example, and I'll show you some data a little bit later on about where Brazil stands on this and where other countries stand. How much social progress do you get for the same amount of spending? Very good question. Very good way to benchmark and compare different public policies and different government actors in different parts of the world. So we already can do that. We'll be able to do that better over time. And then the final thing that we set out to do was to create a framework that was comprehensive enough that it would be relevant to every single country. A lot of the measurement efforts have really focused on either relatively poor countries or relative higher income countries. But as you'll see here, this framework really provides the scope to measure social progress really anywhere. And with the understanding that countries will progress over time, every country won't be equal. Economic success does matter. A rich country can aspire to more than a country that has a very limited per capita income. But as you'll see, economic success alone does not tell the story about social progress. And in fact, there's some very, very interesting findings about the relationship that we'll cover in a minute. So in order to build the index, we have to have a sort of definition of what we mean by social progress. This is the working definition that emerged from the review of the literature and the scholarly writing in this area and talking to thought leaders. It's a fairly broad definition. It encompasses basic needs, shelter, nutrition, sanitation, things like that. But it also encompasses the assets that are necessary to enable people to enjoy and improve the quality of their lives, and it also includes the whole question of opportunity. Is the society a society in which any individual, no matter who they are or where they're from or where they live or what their background is, actually has the opportunity to make choices and hopefully achieve whatever potential they have? Is that possible? And that dimension of social progress is also captured in this definition. Now, to make this more concrete, the actual framework that has emerged is illustrated here on this slide. Social progress, in this broad sense, consists of these three key dimensions: basic human needs, foundations of well-being or quality of life, and opportunity. And you can see the individual components that make up those elements. And then with each component, there are actually usually several indicators. So in total, there's quite a few pieces of data that come and get pulled together into this framework. Why these particular areas? How do we know to put these things up here rather than something else? Well, the answer is there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of thinking about social progress and what it means. And over many, many months, the team here really tried to immerse itself in that knowledge and try to pull it together. I'm sure it can be improved. I'm sure it will evolve over time. But it's the first time that this has ever been attempted, and we think it's very interesting already, and hopefully it will get more interesting over time. Okay. Now, if you take the available data, what we did was we looked at all the data available to measure all of these things. And you can see, I'm getting tired just remembering what we had to do. And we looked at all the data sources. And we needed data sources that were comparable across countries, that we thought the person who did the work, the data did it well. Or not perfect, but well anyway. We had to kind of look at for consistency, and they're clearly data that can be improved. But based on the data sources, we selected an initial group of 50 countries. These countries represent 2/3 of all the people on the earth. But they're just the beginning. We'll go beyond these 50 countries. For these countries, we had most all of the important data was available and seemed trustworthy, or at least reasonable. And with some modest of special work, we could fill out the whole sample for each of these countries. You see then the ranking that comes from taking all this data statistically with, I think, quite a good methodology and rolling it up to an overall index. But we can look at how countries stand area by area, component by component, indicator by indicator. As well as we can look at the total based on how it all kind of rolls up into a total package. And I won't bore you with all the econometric and statistical techniques that are used to do that in the world-class way, based on the best indexes that have been so far developed. No basic surprise that countries on the top of the list tend to be high-income countries. The countries on the bottom of the list tend to be low-income countries. There is quite a relationship between economic success and social progress. And I don't think we should be surprised by that. What is interesting, though, and we didn't know until we tried it, but what is interesting is that it's not simple. This slide, you see social progress on the vertical axis. That's the index, the overall index, and GDP per capita on the horizontal axis. And we all know what that is. And yes, you see there is generally a tendency as income goes up for social progress to go up. But it's far from precise, is it? We see some countries that seem to do a lot better on social progress relative to their income. We see other countries, like, for example, Russia or United Arab Emirates, that despite the fact that they have pretty high incomes, don't do very well on social progress. There's not a one-to-one connection here. It's not just automatic. If you just have higher income, it doesn't automatically translate into a higher level of social progress. And it's understanding these connections and who did well and who did poorly and who stood where and who stood who was up and who was down, it has been the kind of fascinating journey that we've been on. Now you'll all spot Brazil, and I'll come back to Brazil in a minute. But let's start with the overall picture, the 50 countries. Now again, if we look at low-income countries, this just highlights two of those countries, Ghana and Nigeria. Almost exactly the same level of per capita income. Yet Ghana has achieved a much higher level of social progress on those various measures. Meeting basic needs, foundations for high quality of life, and sense of opportunity than Nigeria. It's not just income. It has to do with lots of other choices and lots of other things that countries do. And are able to get done in determining how they ultimately translate income into social progress. Again, if we look in the middle income, Costa Rica turns out to be really a very, very high performer here. For its income, Costa Rica is achieving much, much higher social progress, for example, than South Africa. Again, Costa Rica and South Africa have virtually the same income. But the social progress is very, very different. And if you look at the high-income countries, we see something very interesting. Yes, high-income countries differ in their social progress, but what's interesting is this kind of slowing rate of progress. When you get to high income, if you get to South Korea levels or Spain levels, you're pretty much, you don't get much better as your income goes up beyond that. What we find is that high-income countries start to encounter difficulties in terms of social progress as they get high income. And some countries are better able to deal with those challenges than others. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Some of the findings from the analysis that we've been doing about the relationship between economic and social progress are these. Clearly, economic progress is necessary and good for social progress, but not sufficient. There's more to it than that. Some types of economic development seem to erode social progress, not actually move it up. So we have to identify what those are and how to avoid them. We have started to get richer and richer insight into how social progress improvement actually enables economic development. So the direction of cause is not from economic to social only, it's also from social to economic. We're starting to understand that. And then, of course, we find that how much money you spend doesn't necessarily directly determine the social progress you achieve. Again, nothing that should surprise any of us, but we never knew. We never knew. We didn't have the data. This is kind of an interesting chart. We didn't put any country labels on this. This is social progress on the vertical axis again. And government expenditures or percent of GDP on the horizontal axis. What does that look like? It looks like throwing darts. It's almost random. That's interesting. It means that some governments are able to translate spending as a percent of GDP into much higher social progress than others. So you might guess where Brazil's going to be on this chart. I'm going to show you later. You might guess where Brazil is on this chart. When I'll come to that in just a minute. But again, without this systematic way of measuring social progress, we don't know. We don't have a way to see how well we're doing, to see whether we're using our resources effectively to get good outcomes. And that really is really the vision and the driving force behind this entire effort. It's not to have an index. It's about how to get things to get better, how to use resources better, how to mobilize the NGOs, the private sector, and business more effectively. That's what this is all about. And that's why we are so excited to be here with all of you, because you all are demonstrated leaders in trying to do things. And we're so happy to have the partnership with the Institute, because the Institute has a long tradition of mobilizing actors in the private sector to actually work on things. And that's what this broader effort on a global basis seeks to do. Now, turning to Brazil, I think the highlight here is, despite the fact that there's demonstrations, if you actually look at it objectively based on data, Brazil's doing pretty well on social progress, measured consistently and comparatively across countries. Brazil is doing about as well as you would expect given your income levels. A little higher, but within the statistical confidence, about as well. It's hard to say that Brazil is much, much better than you would expect, but it's doing well. You have clearly beaten all the other bricks. You're the best brick at social progress. That's pretty good, isn't it? I'd be happy about that. If you compare yourself to the others, Russia has like much higher income than Brazil. And yet Brazil is hugely more successful in these social outcomes. And that's because, I think, for me as an outsider who's not here every day, and therefore doesn't get frustrated by what isn't as good as you'd like, as an outsider, Brazil's had a commitment to this area for a long time. You cared about inclusion. You cared about the environment. Is it perfect? No. Could you do it better? Yes. But there's been a commitment and a sort of value in this society that I think has allowed this country to achieve this level of social progress, despite all the things that could be done better. Let's kind of deepen, however, the analysis. Again, one thing we want to look at is sort of the overall score, if you will, but we also then find that some of the most important things that come out of this effort is when you tear it apart into the pieces and look at the pieces in the context of the whole. And this chart is kind of the pieces. So if you look at the index, there's the three big areas: basic needs, the foundation, the well-being, and the opportunity. Brazil ranks 18 on the overall index. a little bit better than you rank among the same countries on GDP per capita, which is 24. So that's good. The green means strength, ahead of where we would expect. The yellow means, okay, solid. And it's a bit hard to see the yellow color on this particular chart. And the red means, we're lagging. We're lagging. So where are we lagging? And I would be shocked if any of you were surprised by any of this, because you live here. But seeing this, we believe, is very, very powerful. You lag on personal safety. You know that. I guess what you may not know is just how much you lag on personal safety. 46 out of the 50 countries. Now, you're down into the very, very low-income countries, in terms of that level of ranking, okay? And it's not just one thing about personal safety, it's everything about personal safety. So this is clearly, in terms of the basic needs of any human society, we're not doing well on one of the most fundamental, okay? So, gosh, this better be a national priority. We better have a lot of ideas about what to do about this. And we ought to be doing things. And the question is, are we? And that is what the action process is all about. Some issues of nutrition, not quite as vivid on the top. Some issues of water and sanitation. And air pollution, that is a health hazard, some issues there. Some issues with some dimensions of political and property rights. Some issues of the role and respect for women in the society. You see here in multiple places. The most obvious is women treated with respect. This comes from an international survey by Gallup, which is quite well done, where this is an area where Brazil would, I think, aspire to do better. We see women's access to tertiary education. We see women's years in school. We see a number of indications that we haven't really fundamentally addressed that issue yet in this society, despite the fact that as an inclusive society that's open to different kinds of people with different kinds of backgrounds, by and large, Brazil ranks pretty well. So on the opportunity dimension, and then we're pretty good on freedom and choice and rights in general, but we fall down here. Now again, I suspect that many of you would say, I live here, I get this, I sort of see this. But what we find is without a sort of comparative framework and a holistic framework, that's like kind of the Global Competitiveness Report. The Global Competitiveness Report looks at everything about economic competitiveness. And it says, okay, here's how you're doing on all the things that matter, and it allows you to go to the 5 things that are really holding you back. And that's what that powerful measurement tool allows you to do. Here now, with this measurement tool, we're hoping to have the same ability to say, okay, there's a lot of things we'd like to move better, a lot of things we can improve, but if we really have to understand the pressing constraints, the pressing issues, here's where we would start. That's the fundamental goal, really, behind this effort. Now, here's the chart with the countries on it. This is a very small type, and I apologize for that. It's we had some technical issues with this chart. But let me use my little red pointer. Here's Brazil, right here. Okay? So basically, Brazil is achieving this level of social progress, like 52. And this is how much you're spending as a percentage of GDP. can't get my little red marker to help me, okay? So, if you look at the higher income countries, of course the outlier is France. You know, France is spending a ton of money, public money, but look at how its level of social progress is actually at the bottom of the higher income countries. Brazil is not quite as striking an example, but you can see that there's other countries that are achieving equal or better social progress with a lot less public spending as a share of GDP. So there's a signal here. There's an indication here that, you know, one of the fundamental issues that this country is going to have to tackle is really getting good outcomes for the money. And again, I think all of you know that. You know that in the healthcare system. You know that in the public education and the reforms of that's taken place over time. But I think this just accents the idea that just spending money isn't the answer. You know, it's spending the money well. And I think too often developing country governments and even advanced country governments think that if they just raise the budget and pass legislation to put more money into it, that somehow solves the problem. And we want, with the Social Progress Index, to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore. Because it's a great waste of our precious societal resources if we can't use our public programs and our public spending to get good results. But yet there hasn't been a framework to really measure this and hold governments accountable in a positive way. We're not anti-government. We believe in government. We believe government has a profound role in any healthy society. The question is, how does government do its job better rather than worse? That's the question we're asking. Now, let me just kind of now turn to the question, okay, what do we do next? And the founders of this effort had a vision which I, of course, embraced very enthusiastically, and that is that this is ultimately about action. It's about translating the process into insight and action on the ground. And on the ground initially is at the country level. So what we are doing now is going from country to country and establishing a national committee of interested parties that are committed to this agenda that will agree and commit to, first of all, learning from all the data about their country and what the agenda needs to be, and then taking steps to reach out to the right people and the right stakeholders to get something done. And we have built these national committees now in a number of countries in Latin America, and we are early in that process here in Brazil. The national committees interpret the data and identify the priorities, they pursue policy change, and then they hopefully improve the data. Because one of the things we need to do is make the data better. And we know it can be better. And we know that some of the data may be misleading or biased. So that's a critical thing that we need to happen at the country level as well. Now, as we think about moving to action, this raises the question of action by who? Who should take the action? And of course, the traditional answer to this question in the social progress area would be, first, government. This is what government's in charge of. So government should take the action. And we agree, government needs to take action. Second answer would be NGOs. NGOs are set up to deal with these social progress issues. So they need to take action, and we agree. They need to take action. But we believe that, given what we know today about development and about social progress, that business is just as important, or can be important, maybe not as important, but important, just like the other two major stakeholders. And so one of our goals in this effort is to mobilize the private sector around the world, not just in competitiveness, in the economic sense, but also in social progress, and that the philosophy and the motivation behind that needs to be evolving. I think traditionally, business has viewed the problem of dealing with society primarily through the lens of philanthropy. That business's role in dealing with primary education or nutrition was primarily philanthropic. That it should be supporting NGOs, that it should be supporting programs and worthy causes, and that was the way business should participate. And businesses are doing that, and that's happening in Brazil, and we are happy about that and encourage that to continue. Beyond philanthropy, the kind of next stage in business thinking was that every business needs to start thinking in terms of being responsible. And that corporate social responsibility sort of emerged as a broader idea of how business should be engaged. And corporate social responsibility includes not just being philanthropic, but it includes being ethical, meeting the standards of the community, complying with those standards, and operating in a sustainable way. And we heard that earlier in this session. We agree with that. We agree that business needs to do more than just give money. We agree that business has a broad set of criteria that it needs to meet in order to be able to say that it's a responsible company. And so we would encourage this to continue. And we think that in Brazil, the movement from just philanthropy to really fully blown corporate social responsibility has been dramatically enhanced by this organization. And many of you in this room are companies that have been leading that charge. And we're thrilled about that. But what we're also seeing today is a next possibility. Not for everything. This doesn't mean that business needs to stop the things on the left, but it means that there's actually an additional possibility, and that additional possibility may actually have the biggest impact. Corporate social responsibility is often mostly about reducing harm. Reducing harm. But what we're finding is more and more evidence that business can not only reduce harm, but they can actually create solutions. Solutions to issues that would once have been seen as social issues having nothing to do with the business. Whether it's a bank who is providing financial services to people who've never had financial services before, and who therefore have never been able to save, and who've never been able to efficiently manage their financial affairs. You know, that's dealing with a fundamental social need, but it's doing it through the business. And that's what we call shared value. Shared value says that for some issues, depending on our particular business, we can move beyond corporate social responsibility and actually view it as part of the business. And we can approach these issues with a business model. And that means that we can do it at a profit. Now in Brazil, I'm a little nervous about saying that. Because so many people believe that a profit is something to be concerned about from a social point of view. But let me suggest another way of looking at it. If a company can find a way to meet an important social need and make a profit, what does that really mean? Well, what that means is that it's got a solution. Because if you can make a profit, you can scale. If you can serve 1,000 people, you can serve 1 million. If you can serve 1 million, you can serve 50 million. Profit, and dare I say capitalism, works best when it's meeting important needs in a sustainable way because it's self-paying and it can be expanded and scaled and improved over time. So the possibility that we're seeing more and more as we look at issue after issue after issue is that business doesn't just need to stop at being socially responsible. It can often have a much bigger impact than that if it can be creative and innovative in inventing business models with which to tackle low-income farmers, poor water usage, wasting of energy, unnecessary logistics, poor nutrition, poor health. All those issues are amenable to business models. And what we're seeing around the world is an explosion of innovation here. And by the way, a lot of this is being done by social entrepreneurs. See, the normal companies didn't think about this. They thought about meeting the same old needs they've been meeting in the past. But often the social entrepreneur said, gosh, I could do something about that, and if I did it this way, I could actually get revenue, and I could pay for it, and grow it. And the social entrepreneur often thought of these ideas before the businesses did. Some of the great social entrepreneurial success sources in the world are embarrassment to the private sector. Why didn't the private sector think of that? They were supposed to be the businesses, but the social entrepreneurs figured it out first. We're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation going on in this area of creating shared value. So, in terms of dealing with these social problems that are identified by our index and our benchmarking process, what we're starting to understand is that yes, the private sector needs to be a participant in the social responsibility sense, but it also needs to be looking for these opportunities to really drive innovation with shared value. And government needs to start looking at businesses not just as sources of tax revenue, but also as collaborators in driving shared value. Because if that happens, government doesn't need more taxes. Government can simply enable a scalable process to take place in the private sector. And there's many, many examples of this. From every continent, in every area of social progress, we're seeing this opportunity. So we believe that if the social progress effort is to succeed, we have to engage not only the constituencies that we've come to know and love, government and NGOs, but we also have to engage the private sector in all of its roles. In all of its roles. Then the opportunity becomes even greater. Just in terms of giving you some examples of what I mean by shared value, here's a company in India. It's a company that makes technology for irrigation of crops. And it's had a particular focus on smallholders or relatively small farmers, primarily in India, but over time has grown on a worldwide basis. And this company has addressed 4 million farmers. 4 million little farmer households around the globe. And look at what it's done. Through its product, which is an innovative, affordable technology for irrigation, which is very water conserving, it's been able to reduce the water use by these small farmers by 40%. I can tell you there's no government program that I'm aware of that's reduced water use by that much among a significant population. Okay? But this was not done as a policy program. This was done through shared value, through an innovative product that was affordable, the ability to train the farmers in how to use the product, and ultimately achieve the result, and by the way, at the same time improving crop yields and significantly improving farmer income. This is shared value. And the good news is this company can serve 40 million farmers. It's not like an NGO that has to raise more money if it wants to serve more people. That's the power of shared value. It won't solve all the problems. We need all the stakeholders to play here. But since so many of you are from the business community, I want you to see that you actually can play as well. And you can play through what you do best, your business, rather than only play through these other associated activities. I couldn't resist a Brazilian example, and little did I know that the chairman would be sitting on the stage. I used this example for the first time at TED in Scotland, at TED Global. I just stumbled across this company. How do we deal with the sustainability of forests? Well, we can spend a lot of money to buy up forests so nobody can, do anything to them. That's one solution, but the trouble with that solution is it costs gajillions of dollars. And the resource and the land, is preserved, but it's preserved. That is, it's not able to be productive and generate the things that society needs. Let's look at another alternative. What if we have a company? What if we have a company that just doesn't cut down the trees that are there and deforest, which is what happened for so many years, but figures out that there's a certain kind of tree, and you all know this, eucalyptus, that actually produces a lot more relevant pulp per hectare than other kinds of forests, and certainly an old growth forest. So it takes some land and plants this new technology, dramatically improves the output of pulp, is able to make the same amount of material with much less land. And then it goes and says, okay, but what about all the small landholders around our operations? Well, what about them? Well, let's teach them how to plant a few of these trees on their land. And to make a long story short, as of today, almost 30% of all the raw material used in their mills comes not from their land, but from the few trees that the small landholders near them have. And all of a sudden they have a new source of income. And then it figures out how to, rather than have their plantations cover huge swaths of land, it mixes the plantations with untouched forests and ecosystems. And it realizes that not only does that make everybody happy that it's preserved the untouched ecosystem, but actually having the untouched ecosystem makes the plantations more productive because of the ability to preserve the water and capture water better. So this is shared value. This is shared value. And the more we can attack societal problems this way, I think the more we will make even greater progress than we're making the way we are. Again, and what we're finding is NGOs around the world are starting to see that if they partner in these kind of activities, what they so much want to achieve, which is better water use or higher incomes for small farmers or better nutrition, if they can partner with companies that think this way and operate this way, look at how much more results can be achieved than if we simply take the siloed approach that we have in the past. So, where do we go from here? Well, we have started to form a national committee in Brazil. We're very proud of the organizations that have come forward and become kind of charter members of this group. Avena Foundation, which is a truly innovative foundation covering most of Latin America and the Caribbean, is one of our launch partners. The Ethos Institute, we're very proud to have as one of our founding partners. And you see some large multinational private sector companies, Deloitte and Coca-Cola. We're very proud to have them as partners. We're in discussions with a wide variety of other organizations, and we expect to talk to many more. If anybody in this room or your organization would like to be part of this, we would be absolutely thrilled. I can imagine what will happen over time as we get a greater critical mass. We can start to break the group into subgroups that look at particular sectors and particular issues. This will be, I think, a tremendous opportunity for mutual learning, and it'll be an opportunity to take whatever your social responsibility activities have been in the past and really take them to the next level. So we would really welcome the opportunity to work with any of you in this effort, and we will make it easy for you to find us, and we'll follow up promptly. I want to conclude by saying that this effort is really in its early stages. We have just issued one index in April of this year, 2013. I'm confident that we will issue a better index in April of 2014, next year. We started with 50 countries. I'm confident we'll get to 100. We now have 6 or 7 or 8 national committees among the countries of the world. I'm confident a year from now we'll have many, many more. I'm confident that we will all learn as we go through this process, and I'm also confident that this group is determined to see this forward for the long run. I'm hopeful that Brazil, already doing pretty well on social progress if you look at the real data, even though you can do better, I'm hoping that Brazil will embrace this. Just like you've embraced environmental sustainability, this country seems to be willing to take sort of a leadership role in these kind of efforts to make the country and the world a better place. I'm hoping that Brazil will embrace this effort. It's a delicate time in Brazil. It's a delicate time for government in Brazil. But I'm confident that the values are there for Brazil to embrace this. And I'm also very, very hopeful that the business community here will embrace this as really the next chapter of the evolution process that's going on. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your attention. We would welcome any of your comments and feedback about what we're doing, how to do it better, and most of all, we would love you to get involved. Thank you very, very much.